You don't belong here.
You don't belong here. The words slithered out from the lips of Sergeant Rick Dalton, his voice dripping with whiskey and arrogance as he leaned against the table where Danielle and Dominique Carter sat. The Friday night bar buzz froze for a second, like the whole room was waiting to see what would happen. Glasses stopped midair, conversations cut short, and even the jukebox seemed to dull its tune. Danielle, her eyes sharp as flint, didn't flinch. She set her glass down slowly, refusing to let him see her shaken. "Say that again," she replied, her voice low but steady. Rick smirked, tugging his badge just enough for the dim light to catch the shine. "Off-duty, drunk, but flashing power like a weapon. You heard me. This is my town, my bar, my rules. And right now, you're breaking them." Behind him, two other officers, Mark Stevens and Kyle Boyd, laughed, their chuckles greasy and mean. They staggered closer, the smell of alcohol wrapping around them like armor. Mark rested his thick hands on Dominique's chair, leaning in so close she could feel his breath on her neck. "Looks like the princesses need some manners taught." The crowd didn't move. A bartender polishing glasses froze in place, jaw tight, eyes darting from the sisters to the officers. Patrons hunched lower, staring into their drinks, pretending not to notice. Fear thickened the air. Fear of the badge, fear of what happens when you speak against it. Dominique's hands tightened around her glass, but her face stayed calm, unreadable. She'd been trained for worse. Both sisters had. But still, humiliation burned like acid, because they weren't facing warlords overseas or cartel enforcers in some hidden alley. They were facing men in blue, men who swore an oath to protect, now twisting it into a weapon. Rick dragged out a chair, turned it backward, and straddled it right in front of Danielle, his grin wide, ugly. "See, you girls walk in here like you own the place. But let me remind you, you don't. Not here. Not in my town." His words weren't loud, but they carried, slicing through the silence, cutting at their dignity. Dominique turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Danielle. Years of sisterhood, years of training, passed in a single glance. "Don't break." Not yet, but the tension climbed higher. Kyle slurred out something about double the chocolate, and laughter erupted from their corner, cruel and mocking. Danielle's spine stiffened, her voice cold and sharp enough to slice glass. "Last warning. Step back." Rick's grin faltered for a moment. Just a flicker. But he covered it with a laugh, leaning even closer. "Or what? You think you're in charge here?" His hand slammed the table, rattling their drinks. The crowd jumped at the sound, but still, no one spoke. In that moment, the Carter sisters weren't just two women in a bar. They were a test. A test of silence, of power, of who would bow and who would rise. And neither sister had ever been good at bowing. The chair screeched across the floor as Rick shoved it back, standing now, towering over the sisters. His smirk twisted into something sharper, crueler. Mark's grip on Dominique's shoulders tightened, his thick fingers digging in as if daring her to resist. Kyle swayed unsteadily, but his eyes glimmered with mean excitement, the kind that only got uglier when mixed with power and alcohol. Danielle leaned forward, her voice low but cutting enough to slice through the thick barroom air. "Take your hands off my sister. Now." Mark chuckled darkly, squeezing harder. "Or what? You gonna call the cops?" His words sparked laughter from the trio, but no one else in the bar joined in. The silence from the patrons was deafening, complicit. Eyes turned away, feet shuffled nervously, but no one spoke. Everyone knew the unwritten rule. You don't cross men with badges in this town. Rick tapped his finger on his belt, where his handcuffs dangled like a promise. "You hear that, boys? These two think they're running the show. Maybe we ought to remind them what happens when people forget who's in charge." His voice wasn't just threatening. It carried the weight of a man who knew the law bent for him, never against him. Dominique's jaw clenched, her fury barely contained. Every nerve screamed to strike, to flip Mark onto the floor, to end this farce in seconds. But she held back, her training drilling restraint into her bones. Patience, she reminded herself. Not yet. Kyle staggered forward, nearly spilling his drink, and pulled out his cuffs. "Let's book 'em. Disorderly conduct, resisting authority, whatever we feel like. Who's gonna argue?" He swung the metal playfully, letting the clink echo in the tense silence. "Enough," Danielle snapped, her voice carrying farther this time. It cut through the bar, through the cowardly quiet, demanding attention. She stood, her height nearly matching Rick's, her eyes locked on his. "You're drunk. You're out of line. Back away before you regret this." For a heartbeat, the bar seemed to hold its breath. A whisper of hope rippled. Maybe he'd back down. Maybe humiliation would be enough. But then Rick laughed, harsh and ugly. He lunged forward, shoving Danielle hard against the wall. Her glass shattered on the floor, shards scattering like broken promises. The bar gasped, but still no one moved. Not one soul. Rick's voice thundered as he yanked Danielle's arms behind her back. "That's it. You're done. Both of you. Resisting arrest, threatening an officer. Hell, I'll throw in assault." The cold bite of steel snapped around her wrists. Dominique shot to her feet. But Mark was ready, twisting her arms roughly until the cuffs clamped tight. The humiliation burned deeper than the metal. They had spent years earning their authority, their respect, their place as protectors of the nation. And here, in their own country, they were reduced to criminals for daring to say no. Rick paraded them toward the door, loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "Ladies, welcome to a night in my system. Let's see if your pretty faces get you out of this one." The crowd parted like water, silent, ashamed. Phones stayed in pockets. Eyes stayed down. The sisters were shoved outside into the night, their dignity stripped, their freedom stolen. And as the patrol car door slammed shut behind them, both Danielle and Dominique knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a battle bigger than the bar, bigger than the cuffs, one that would shake the walls of the very system these men thought protected them. The stench of stale coffee and disinfectant clung to the Sandbrook police station as the heavy, metal doors clanged shut behind Danielle and Dominique. Their wrists ached from the cuffs, their skin raw where steel had bitten too tight. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his crossword as Rick shoved them forward with a drunken flourish, smirking like a king presenting trophies. "Two troublemakers fresh from the bar," Rick announced loudly, his voice echoing through the half-empty booking area. "Resisted arrest, threatened officers, disturbing the peace." He slapped the paperwork onto the counter with exaggerated force. "Add whatever else sounds good." The sergeant lifted his eyes lazily, then blinked at the sight of the sisters. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe recognition, but it was gone in an instant. He sighed, tapping his pen against the desk. "You got evidence?" Rick leaned down, close enough for the man to smell the bourbon on his breath. "My word is evidence. That enough for you?" Dominique stepped forward despite the chains, her voice level, cold. "Your word isn't evidence. It's a lie. We complied with every order. I want my phone call. Now." Rick's grin widened. "Hear that? Demanding already. Must be nice thinking you still got rights." He spun her around and shoved her toward the holding cells, ignoring the sergeant's wary look. Mark followed with Danielle, his hand pressing hard into the small of her back as if punishing her for standing tall. The cells were cold, concrete boxes with rusted bars. Rick threw Dominique in first, the door slamming with a sound that reverberated through the hollow station. Kyle stumbled in behind Danielle, nearly tripping, but still managed to snap the cuffs tighter before shoving her inside. "You ladies sit tight," Rick said, leaning on the bars with mock sympathy. "By tomorrow, you'll be just another pair of names in the system. Maybe you'll even thank us when the charges stick." Danielle's eyes narrowed, her voice ablade. "You've made a mistake, and deep down you know it." For the first time, Rick's grin faltered only for a second. Then he straightened, puffing his chest. "The only mistake here was thinking you had power in my town." He tapped the bars, the metal ringing like a warning bell, then swaggered away with Kyle and Mark in tow. Silence fell. The sisters sat on the cold benches, exchanging a look that carried more weight than words. They'd fought through ambushes in deserts, interrogations overseas, and missions where one wrong step meant death. This was different. This wasn't war abroad. This was war at home, where enemies wore badges and the system shielded them. Danielle's jaw tightened as she whispered, just loud enough for Dominique to hear. "They think these bars are the end, but they just lock themselves in with us." Dominique nodded, her dark eyes burning. "And when the truth comes out, it'll bury them." The fluorescent lights above flickered, buzzing like angry wasps. Outside the cells, the corrupt men laughed, their voices carrying down the hall. But inside, in the stillness, the sisters' resolve hardened. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about every silent victim who never got the chance to fight back. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polished marble, but beneath the veneer of order, the air pulsed with tension. Reporters lined the benches, pens poised, cameras humming low like insects waiting for blood. Danielle and Dominique were led in through the side door, wrists chained, orange jumpsuits replacing their clothes from the night before. The spectacle was intentional. The cuffs, the uniforms, it was all part of the story Rick and his buddies had written before dawn. Judge Hollins adjusted her glasses as the sisters were seated at the defense table. Her eyes flicked from them to the officers lounging across the aisle, smug in crisp uniforms, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Rick leaned back in his chair, smirking, whispering something to Mark that made them both chuckle. Kyle sat stiff, jaw tight, the faintest tremor betraying the hangover hiding beneath his facade of authority. The prosecutor cleared his throat, launching into a narrative spun from lies. Your Honor, these women were drunk, belligerent, threatening officers of the law. They resisted arrest, attempted assault, and created a disturbance that endangered everyone in the establishment. Each word was polished, rehearsed, and poisonous. Dominique's fists tightened in her lap. She leaned slightly toward her sister, whispering through clenched teeth. They're rewriting everything. Danielle kept her face forward, her tone low but razor sharp. Then we make sure the truth cuts through. The prosecutor called Rick to the stand. He swaggered up like a man taking a victory lap. His testimony dripped arrogance. I gave them every chance to comply, Your Honor. Instead, they cursed, resisted, made threats. I feared for my safety and that of my fellow officers. Standard procedure dictated an arrest. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, the narrative forming neatly on their pads. 2 aggressive women against 3 brave officers. When the judge finally turned to the defense table, her tone was flat. Do the defendants wish to speak? Danielle rose slowly, the chains clinking as she stood tall. Every camera in the room swung toward her. She didn't flinch. She didn't stammer. Her voice was calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of every injustice endured. Your Honor, what you've heard is a performance. My sister and I were eating dinner, quietly, peacefully, until 3 drunk men with badges decided humiliation was sport. We complied. We identified ourselves. We did not resist. The only disturbance was the abuse of authority that brought us here. Rick chuckled loud enough for the room to hear. Yeah, sure. That's what all criminals say. Danielle turned her head, pinning him with a stare that silenced the laughter. Then she looked back to the judge. We are not criminals. We are FBI agents. And those men didn't arrest us to enforce the law. They arrested us to remind us of their power. Whispers swept through the gallery. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed looks. The judge's gavel cracked once for silence, but the seed of doubt had been planted. And in the back row, unseen by the sisters, a figure had just stepped inside the courtroom, a figure whose presence would soon shift the balance. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and every head in the courtroom turned. The click of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor, slow and deliberate, as if time itself paused to make room for what was coming. A tall black man in full navy dress uniform entered, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons and medals that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. His posture was unyielding, his presence commanding. Admiral Jonathan Reeves, one of the highest-ranking officers in Naval Special Warfare Command. The gallery fell into hushed silence. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Judge Hollins leaned forward slightly, eyebrows raised, recognizing the weight of what was unfolding. Reeves walked past the prosecutor's table without so much as a glance, stopping just short of Danielle and Dominique. He looked at them first, steady and reassuring, then turned toward the bench. His voice was deep, steady, and carried without effort. Your Honor, my name is Admiral Reeves. These 2 defendants are not criminals. They are Special Agents Danielle and Dominique Carter. They serve this nation with distinction, and I am here today to speak for their character, their service, and the truth. The courtroom rippled with shock. Rick's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening as the power in the room shifted. He muttered something to Mark, but his eyes betrayed unease. Kyle swallowed hard, sweat forming at his temple. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Admiral Reeves, this is highly irregular. I was not informed you'd be appearing." Reeves nodded once. "I wasn't scheduled, Your Honor. I came the moment I heard two of my best were being slandered in a courtroom. What you've been told so far is a fabrication." He set a thick folder on the defense table, the sound echoing like a hammer strike. "Here are their service records, commendations, mission reports, security clearances. These are not the actions of criminals. These are the actions of women who risk their lives for this country." Reporters surged, pens scratching, cameras snapping in bursts of light. Rick shot to his feet. "Objection! Their military service doesn't erase what happened last night. They disrespected me." Reeves turned his head slowly, pinning Rick with a gaze sharp enough to cut steel. "This is not about your ego, officer. This is about truth. Something your report seems to lack." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged her gavel, but the energy in the room was already shifting. Dominique stood, chains rattling as she faced the court beside her sister. "Your Honor, we didn't resist. We didn't threaten. We complied with everything. And now the only thing we're guilty of is refusing to bow to men who thought their badges made them untouchable." For the first time, Rick's confidence cracked. His face flushed, his smirk forced, his eyes darting nervously between the judge and the Admiral. And then Admiral Reeves said quietly, "Check the surveillance footage outside the bar. It tells the real story." The prosecutor froze. Rick's face drained of color. The courtroom erupted in whispers as the walls of lies began to tremble. The monitor flickered to life at the front of the courtroom, the lights dimmed slightly, and every eye turned toward the grainy footage that would decide everything. The camera angle caught the Carter sisters walking out of the bar, shoulders relaxed, laughing softly as if the night had been nothing more than ordinary. Then a patrol car screeched to a halt. Officer Rick Dalton stepped into frame, swaggering toward them with his hand already resting on his holster. The room was silent except for the soft whir of the machine as the footage rolled on. Marcus, calm, measured, pulled out his wallet, holding it slowly in plain sight. Dominique raised her hands, her face calm but clearly cautious. There was no aggression, no resistance, no provocation. Only compliance. Then Rick shoved Marcus against the truck with unnecessary force, barking orders. Mark slammed Dominique against the hood as Kyle yanked her wrists back. The sisters' voices were steady, asking why, offering ID, insisting they'd done nothing wrong. Rick leaned close, sneering something the microphone couldn't catch, but the malice was visible. And then the cuffs snapped shut. A gasp tore through the gallery. Even the judge's lips parted in visible shock. The footage cut to the sisters being shoved into the back of the car, their faces humiliated but unbroken. When the lights came back up, the silence was suffocating. The prosecutor cleared his throat, clearly scrambling. "Your Honor, video can be misleading. Angles. Lighting. There may be context not shown." "Context?" The judge interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "I see two citizens offering identification and being violently detained without cause. I see no resistance. I see no disorderly conduct. What I see, Counselor, is a complete contradiction of Officer Dalton's sworn testimony." All eyes turned to Rick. His face was red, beads of sweat glistening along his temple. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His voice, once so loud and commanding, had abandoned him. Dominique stood tall, chains rattling as she rose. Her voice was steady, slicing through the tension like glass. "That's the truth. That's what we've been saying since the night it happened. And that is what he tried to bury." Reporters scribbled furiously, the clicking of pens and camera shutters filling the room like the drumbeat of war. Admiral Reeves leaned forward, his voice low but thunderous in its weight. "Your Honor, this is not just misconduct. This is a betrayal of trust. Officers sworn to uphold the law, abusing their power. This court must see it for what it is." Judge Hollins looked over her glasses, her gaze fixed on Rick. "Officer Dalton, do you have any explanation for why your report so drastically contradicts this footage?" Rick's lips parted, his smirk gone, his arrogance shattered. He stammered, reaching for words that weren't there. And in that moment, the predator became prey. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of silence that carried the weight of judgment. Judge Hollins sat tall, her hands folded neatly on the bench, but her eyes, sharp and unwavering, moved from the trembling officers to the sisters who stood in chains at the defense table. "Officer Dalton," she began, her voice calm yet thunderous in the stillness. "What I have witnessed here today is not just misconduct. It is a deliberate abuse of power. You presented this court with a false report. You swore under oath to lies. And now, confronted with undeniable evidence, you stand mute. That silence speaks louder than anything you could say." Rick's jaw clenched, his face pale and slick with sweat. Mark shifted uneasily, cradling his arm as if even his body betrayed him. Kyle sat frozen, his lip quivering, the bravado drained from him like blood from a wound. Judge Hollins turned her gaze to Marcus and Dominique. "This court owes you more than an apology. You were humiliated, violated, and treated as criminals when you are in fact servants of this nation, individuals of honor and sacrifice. The law failed you when it should have protected you." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously, cameras flashing as the story of corruption unfolded live in front of them. Admiral Reeves, stone-faced yet burning with restrained fury, gave the sisters a solemn nod of respect. The judge lifted the gavel, pausing before speaking again. "Effective immediately, all charges against Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ellison and Petty Officer First Class Dominique Carter are dismissed. Furthermore, this court recommends an internal investigation into Officer Rick Dalton, Officer Mark Stevens, and Officer Kyle Boyd for perjury, misconduct, and violation of civil rights. Bailiff, take them into custody pending formal charges." Gasps erupted, the gallery exploding into whispers and flashes. Reporters surged forward, their voices overlapping in a frantic chorus. Rick tried to rise, sputtering with desperation. This is a setup. They provoked us. They resisted." His words cracked, collapsing under the weight of the footage replaying in every reporter's mind. Mark muttered under his breath, "This isn't how it's supposed to go." Kyle buried his face in his hands, shaking his head as bailiffs cuffed them. The same cold steel they had so carelessly snapped onto innocent wrists now biting into their own. Dominique turned toward Danielle, their chains still clinking as they stood tall. She whispered just loud enough for her sister to hear. "We told him this wasn't over." Danielle's lips curved into a hard, triumphant smile. "Now the whole world knows." The gavel slammed once, final and resonant. Court adjourned. In that single strike, power shifted. The officers who once strutted with arrogance now shuffled out in shackles. The sisters, though bruised and scarred, stood unbroken, living proof that truth, though buried, could still rise and destroy lies. The crowd outside the courthouse thundered with chants, a sea of raised fists and tear-streaked faces. Cameras flashed as Danielle and Dominique stood tall at the top of the marble steps, their hands clasped together, their bruises no longer symbols of pain but of resilience. Danielle raised her chin, her voice ringing clear across the square. "When they humiliated us, they thought it was the end of our story. But tonight, you are the proof that truth cannot be buried. We are not broken." The crowd erupted, voices carrying their triumph into the night sky. The scene cut to the defeated officers, Rick Dalton, Mark Stevens, and Kyle Boyd, being led down a dim hallway in orange jumpsuits. Their swagger gone, their heads bowed. A door slammed shut behind them, the echo final and merciless. Then, to Chief Holt, pale and sweating as federal agents pulled him from his office, his hands cuffed. The man who thought he ruled the town now walked through flashing cameras, his empire of lies crumbling in full view of the world. Montage of justice. A mother clutching her son's hand as he was released after years of false imprisonment. Old case files reopened. Stacks of evidence laid bare under federal review. Officer Jenny Morales turning in her badge with quiet dignity, her eyes finally free of fear. Luis standing in the ashes of his burned bar, a crowd surrounding him, rebuilding brick by brick. Back at the courthouse steps, Dominique's voice cut through the roar of the crowd. "This is bigger than us. Bigger than one town. This is about every person who was told to stay quiet. About every voice they tried to silence. Tonight, we proved something powerful. When you stand together, no badge, no lie, no corruption can bury the truth forever. The camera lingered on the sisters, hands raised high, faces lit by the glow of streetlights and flashing cameras. Their eyes burned not just with victory, but with a promise. Danielle leaned forward, her voice softer now, speaking directly into the camera lens. If you believe justice matters, share this story. Don't let it fade. Because tomorrow someone else will face the same silence, the same lies. And maybe they'll find courage knowing that you stood with us, Dominique added. Subscribe right now, because tomorrow's story might just be the one that changes everything for someone who has no voice. The screen filled with the chanting crowd, their voices carrying one unbreakable truth. Silence was no longer an option. The music swelled, powerful and raw, as the camera rose above the courthouse, showing the town bathed in morning light. The sisters walking down the courthouse steps into the waiting crowd. Not victims, not just survivors, but leaders, symbols of what it means to rise unbroken. Because sometimes, courage begins with just two voices refusing to be silenced. And those voices can change the world.